Hello and welcome to Understanding. I'm Craig Biddle, and today I have my guest with me, Spencer Case, Dr. Spencer Case. Welcome, Dr. Case.
Just Spencer, please.
All right, we'll call you Spencer. Um, and today we're gonna talk about moral realism and anti-realism, which is something that Spencer has written and spoken a lot about. However, before we get there, Spencer, would you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do and what your background is?
Okay, a bit about myself. Let's see. I'm a father of two. I feel like that's really important, even though it's not what you're asking, probably. Uh, Came from a Mormon background and ended up leaving the Mormon church when I was about 20. And but I'm still. I wrote an essay about that some years ago, but I still think that it gave me some. The Mormons take the world seriously in a certain sort of way. Like, here's this picture of reality. Do you accept it or not? And I think that did actually, struggling with these issues as a teenager, got me on the path to going into philosophy as a career in a certain way. I was in the army for a while. I lived in Egypt for a while with a Fulbright grant. I was in Wuhan when COVID-19 broke out several years ago. So I've had a fairly adventurous life, and I'm grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, your background in Mormonism and the fact that you're taking ideas seriously sort of stems from that is interesting because that's very similar to my background. Not from a Mormon background, but my father's an Episcopal minister. And so I grew up taking especially morality seriously. And that was sort of what got me interested in getting into these ideas that we're going to be talking about today, even though I did not stick with the theist program. Um, well, listen, before we dive in to talk about realism and anti-realism, I understand that you're either writing or have finished a book on patriotism. I just am curious about not a lot of philosophers who focus on things like moral realism and anti-realism also write about things at the political level. That's a broader span than is at least common in my engagements with people. Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, it's not doing wonders for my career because the market rewards hyper specialization, and I have broad interests, and I think that should count in my favor. Uh, but yeah, I've always been interested in lots of topics. Moral realism has really been the issue that was really the catalyst, or the I guess the portal to philosophy for me. So if I have to say there's one issue I'm really interested in, it's that. But I'm very interested in political issues too. And I was asked to, or invited to contribute to this series called Why It's Okay, the Routledge Why It's Okay series, each installment of which is supposed to defend some maligned concept or position. Why It's Okay to Enjoy the Art of Immoral Artists is one. Why It's Okay to Want to Be Rich is another one. My colleague Rishi Joshi has Why It's Okay to Speak Your Mind, which is a good installment. So I got an invitation to contribute like a few months before I was defending my dissertation, which is on moral realism. So I didn't even reply. But then some years later, I contacted the editor and I'm like, hey, is that offer still valid? Because somebody ought to write one on patriotism. Has anyone written one on patriotism? And he said no. And so I thought, oh, someone ought to do it. So I took it up because I thought it was, it needed to be written, not because I was particularly interested in the topic, but I became more interested in it as I started working on it.
And so, presumably, you advocate some kind of patriotism in the book. Is
I
that
do.
right?
Yeah.
And can you indicate the nature of that kind of patriotism?
Yeah, right. So I'll say as a general matter, to write about patriotism, you want to sort of thread this needle where you don't want it to be something so broad and so generic that absolutely everyone can endorse it uncontroversially. but you also don't want it to be a particular political program that you have to be either a Democrat or Republican to support. But there's got to have some kind of substance to it that is not too thick, but there's still something there. There's still something that can be guiding. And so I emphasize in the book an earlier conception of patriotism, which originated really at the time of the parliamentary politics era, the beginning of that in Britain. This is when people were starting to theorize about patriotism. The word itself was coined a little bit earlier than that, like in the 17th century. But originally, the idea was about transcending your party and transcending your own interest, and working for it. It was an expansion of the moral circle to care about your fellow countrymen, and rather than just your own party or faction or class or interest group or what have you. And that's the kind of notion of patriotism I'm trying to recover. That sense hasn't entirely gone away, but it really, the term drifted a lot, evolved quite a bit in the next couple of centuries, and it came to be more associated with supporting your country during war and supporting your country over other countries and this kind of stuff. And that really was not present in the earliest discussions of patriotism. And so I'm trying to recover this earlier notion. I think that's what we need. If you ask people, do we need to transcend partisanship and our own interests for the good of the country? I think a lot of people will say, oh yeah, that does sound like something we'd do well to recover.
Got it. So actually that will to some extent dovetail with the rest of what we'll talk about today, because in discussing patriotism, I think there's essentially, and you tell me if you think otherwise, but there's essentially two approaches. It can be my country right or wrong, or it can be my country because my country's right, in which case that dives us down into what does it mean for something to be right. And that in short can bring us down to meta-ethics ultimately. How are we going to decide these kinds of things? Does that line of reasoning play a role in the book, by the way? That are you diving into how do we know what's right in that book as well, to try to answer that question about patriotism?
No, that's a little bit off the stage. And I think in the draft I submitted to the publisher, I ended up cutting the discussion of my country right or wrong. Maybe I should do a side piece on that, but I've got a few issues with that phrase and the central place it has in our talking about patriotism. One of the things that irritates me about it is it's kind of a straw man. I don't think that there are very many people who genuinely believe my country right or wrong. Like, the problem with unreflective patriots or nationalists or whatever you want to call them is that they just always believe their country to be right. Yeah. And they don't believe in any constraints in pursuing what they take to be right. That's the problem. You can find this view that a political imperative is something beyond a moral imperative. Sometimes it's expressed. Maybe Machiavelli is an example where the political domain is kind of a ruthless domain, sort of like a Hobbesian state of nature in which the moral rules just don't apply. You just got to be brutal or what have you. Or maybe there are certain oughts, but they're not moral oughts. That view
like
exists.
Realism in foreign policy, and I know you have a military background, so
something like that. Yeah,
like unmoored, just simply unmoored from anything moral. We just need to deal with the real world and deal with what's practical.
Yeah, you could be a realist about foreign. This is so realist about foreign policy on moral grounds. You could think that things go better, like morally better, if countries just stick to defending their own interests or whatever. But there could be a kind of realism whereby you just don't think morality applies at that level. I think so that I would emphatically reject. I don't think.
And it just occurred to me that there could be an equivocation in thinking on this, on the concept that because realism applied to foreign policy doesn't mean there's some real morality that we need to adhere to. It means morality doesn't apply here. We need to deal with reality. So it's a it, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, which is that if you are talking about politics, whether it's domestic politics or anything about patriotism or foreign policy or whatever, there are as I understand it, there are essentially two ways you can go about it. You can either try to ground the thinking about this matter in moral reality, in some moral facts, or not. It's just an either or there. And if you don't, then it's unmoored. And I understand people have theories in that way, and I guess Machiavelli would be one of them. But I think also realism in foreign policy is that way too. It just unfortunately has the term realism in it, which is the opposite of the kind of realism we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, some of these terms are problematic because they're just put to too many different uses.
Yeah.
Like, I think it should be illegal to name any new view about anything internalism. Like that, that has been put to way too many uses. And I do also think there's something problematic about philosophical labels that have resonances or connotations to them, you know. Like realism sounds, like hard-headed or whatever, like or naturalism or pragmatism. These all have fuzzy, warm connotations in natural language. I think that's actually not a good thing, right?
It certainly causes trouble because it serves to infuse discussions with an obstacle right off the bat. If you're opposing something that sounds warm and fuzzy, then you have not only the obstacle of explaining what's wrong with it, but also explaining it against the tide of people feeling like, well, you're going against what's good and moral and right. So, it's I see what you're talking about. It's also very difficult, though, to label anything without some kind of an evaluative connotation.
I guess that's true.
Yeah.
Unless, you do what C.S. Peirce did, and he was just like ruthless about giving the most hackneyed, ugly names to things that, phanerospectry or some term like that for phenomenology. Just like terms that were so ugly that you could not really project a whole lot of warmth onto them. And he did that for methodological reasons I respect, but it doesn't make for great reading, I have to say.
Yeah. And also, you can't expect single concepts to do but so much work, right? And that's why we use sentences and paragraphs in our thinking. So, you've just got to you have to express in fuller form the ideas you're trying to get across, and just deal with that. Well, look, this is a good way a good point, I guess, to segue into just more of a concentrated discussion on realism and anti-realism in morality. How do you, since you have done a lot of thinking and writing about this, how would you define these two camps or schools of thought in metaethics?
I honestly think, so shameless plug, I've got this book with Matt Lutz called Is Morality Real? A Debate. And about the first third of the book is just giving an overview of the different positions and stuff. And then I give my argument, Matt gives his, and then we have a back and forth. So I'm proud of that book, although one limitation is because I'm trying we're both trying to have this as an entry point into metaethics as an established discipline. We just sort of take all of the terms that are used and just sort of go flesh them out as well as we can, clarify them as much as we can, so that you can use this to access other works and stuff. But that does sort of prevented me from some of these terms. I'm like, well, I don't know if I like this way of carving up the territory. A lot of this seems, the distinctions are not as crisp as I would like. And there are a lot of points where I'm like, has anyone ever really fleshed this out because there's a lot of there's some details there, someone somewhere has done it. So I'll say I'll give you the standard the standard breakdown, and then maybe we can interrogate some of these distinctions. So the basic, first you ask this question: if I take a moral statement, how about the transatlantic slave trade was morally wrong? I don't think there's going to be too much disagreement about that. I hope there would not be. So the first question is a linguistic question or a semantic question, which is what's going on with that utterance? Am I attempting to describe reality, or am I expressing my feelings or issuing a command or doing something else other than trying to describe the world? Let's assume that we can clearly distinguish these different functions of language, which I'm not so sure about. But if you say no, I'm saying there's this thing, the transatlantic slave trade, that has this property being wrong. That's what I mean to say. In the same way, when I describe the properties of this water bottle or whatever, I'm attributing a property to something. Okay, if you say that, you accept cognitivism. It's called cognitivism. So it just means that moral statements are meaningful. They have a truth value. They can be true or false, in principle. They're the kind of statement that can be true or false. If you reject that, you're a non-cognitivist. And I think pretty much the only kind of non-cognitivism defended nowadays is expressivism. And expressivism is just the view that actually what it grammatically looks like a statement or a description of reality turns out to be an expression of feelings. So when I say,
also called emotivism at times,
it used to be called emotivism. It used to be called that. C.L. Stevens called it emotivism. It's called expressivism now, and it's more sophisticated now, but the basic idea is the same. So an emotivist or an expressivist is going to say that the transatlantic slave trade is morally wrong, amounts to saying like boo the transatlantic slave trade. I'm not describing it as wrong. I am expressing my feelings. So the grammatical description disguises a different kind of speech act, I suppose. I've always wondered, this is a bit of a tangent, but I just feel like I need to flag this. In writing this book, and even before that, I thought well, it's interesting that this view focuses on language, whereas I would think the interesting thing would be what's going on in the mind, right? Like if I think to myself, a slave trade is morally wrong, is the thought an expression to myself? It doesn't, it's weird to think of just a thought as an expression. Like I'm not even sure that that's coherent. And I'm surprised at how little I haven't gone super deep into the expressivist literature. So I assume it's addressed somewhere, but it does seem to me that the more fundamental point is about like the thoughts, not utterances about these things. Okay. So I like the way my advisor Graham Audie breaks the realism down. Is you've got the degrees of realism, and if you say, okay, I'm a cognitivist, moral statements purport to describe the world. Maybe moral thoughts purport to be about the world, and they can be true or false. That's degree 1. Okay. Second question, are any of these statements true? I think probably if it's not true that the transatlantic slave trade is morally wrong, probably nothing is wrong. I mean, that's about as paradigmatically wrong as it gets. Lots of other examples of hideous things humans have done to each other and to animals over history. But if you say no, Uh, there are all of these statements that we make about ethics. None of them are actually true. They purport to describe reality, but none of them are actually true. That's called error theory or nihilism. And my interlocutor in this book, Matt Lutz, he says, like, oh, I don't want to call it nihilism because that has a negative connotation. And I thought, like, yeah, well, why shouldn't that you have a negative connotation? But I guess it goes back to that point about terminology. So I guess the neutral way of describing it is error theory. I guess I'm just going to go on critiquing these labels as I go, since I started out in that vein. So the reason it's called error theory is that these statements have they purport to have some kind of a meaning, or they do have a meaning, but they have a truth value. They can be true or false. None of them are true. None of them are true. All of them are false, or on some esoteric versions of this, there's some other truth value they have that's not truth. I guess that counts as an error theory. What I don't like about that way of carving up the terminology is it seems to me that the expressivists also have it could also just as well be described as error theory, because we often take ourselves to be describing ethical features of the world. If it turns out we're just expressing our feelings, well, that seems like an error at least as fundamental as the metaphysical error that the error theorist says that we're actually making. So I don't really like these labels, but I'm just the messenger here.
Yeah, the lay of the land out there.
Yeah,
and people talk about this stuff. Yeah,
I'm just the messenger here. So that, and if you say yes, okay, so you say yes, some moral statements are true, or excuse me, moral statements are meaningful and some of them are true. That gets you, Jeffrey Sayer McCord called it minimal realism. And I'm happy with that term, but it's usually when people say that they're realists, they mean at least one more step beyond this. So the one step is, okay, so, and this is, I think, the drawing the lines on this one turns out to be especially hard, and I'm not totally happy with how it's been done. But the basic idea is like, okay, our basic moral truths are the things that make moral statements true. Do these depend on human attitudes or preferences or beliefs in some fundamental way? And the best way, I think, to draw this kind of distinction is to look at things that are socially constructed. So there are facts about currency. There's a fact about the exchange value between the yuan and the dollar today. I don't know what that fact is. I haven't been looking at the markets, but there is some fact about exchange value. But it's dependent. It's fundamentally dependent on human attitudes, right? The dollar is currency only because we treat it as such. If we just decided that the dollar wasn't money, it wouldn't be money. If we decided that we're going to go to the euro now, that would be money. And dollars would just be pieces of paper. They used to be currency, but they would be no longer. Okay, so are moral facts like that? And if you say yes, moral facts are like that, then you've got something. You could give a number of different labels to this. You could call it constructivism. You could call it relativism. You could call it subjectivism. But the idea is you've got moral truths that are dependent on human attitudes. And this is, I think, rightly regarded as falling short of realism of the kind that we're realists want to defend. Although I find this a little bit tricky because I think, well, facts about human beliefs and attitudes can be morally relevant. Like, so, for example, one view you can have is that hedonism is true, so the only value in the universe is experiential and it's pleasure, and the only disvalue is pain, or I suppose maybe the absence of pleasure you could talk about as disvalue of a kind. So what's odd about that is it seems like you should be able to call yourself a realist and think that value is experiential. But if value is fundamentally experiential, then it does have this dependence on our attitudes. Well, at least it could, depending on what your philosophical account of pain and pleasure are. But it's very plausible that it would. That seems off in a certain way. So I feel like cashing out this, sometimes it's called the stance independence criterion of realism, the thing that gets you past relativism, basically. Cashing out what precisely that is turns out to be very tricky. If you want to carve up the territory in what seems like the right way. Okay. So suppose you say, okay, no, ethical truths are not like currency truths, and they're not like fashion truths either. They're more like, I mean, it tends to be compared to the truths of science. Water is H2O. It's more like that than so that gets you to realism. That gets you to realism. So what you have when you finally arrive at realism, you've got moral statements are meaningful. Some of them are true. And what makes those that are true is not human attitudes. It is some feature of reality that is not up to us, that would have been there even if we were never around. So that's realism in a nutshell. And then sometimes people go beyond that and say, well, okay, are those objective facts? Are they natural facts or are they non-natural facts? And I don't even know what that distinction is supposed to amount to. I think naturalism, I've just not heard a way of cashing out that term that I find is totally satisfying, so I just avoid it. I think realism is the whole picture. Whether you want to say non-naturalist or naturalist, I don't know. I don't think there's a whole lot of interesting, I don't know.
I think the naturalist side there, as I understand it, is the idea that it's some fact of nature, for instance, the existence of pleasure or the possibility of pleasure or the possibility of happiness or the possibility of remaining alive, right? So those are natural facts, whereas G.E. Moore, who I think sort of is the main figure in the non-naturalist realist side of this, basically held that no, it can't be tied to natural facts. It's got to be non-natural. Good just means good. It's not definable in terms of natural facts like happiness or pleasure or the like. It's its own thing, and it's the end of the road. Good is good. You can't get under it. You can't define it. This is what the naturalistic fallacy is allegedly supposed to mean, right? You're trying to define good in terms of natural things. And Moore says, nope, you can't do that. That's a fallacy, which I would dispute, but that's the way that this is typically conceived, as I understand it.
I think this is so muddled. Yeah, I don't.
I think it's muddled also. But this is the way that people generally speak about this. I want to say a word on that if you would, but I also want to get into your particular. I understand you're a realist, and I'd be curious just sort of hear what's your argument for realism yourself, and what do you think is the basis for this being real, whether it's natural or non-natural. What's your foundation for this?
Yeah, right. I know. I'm so sorry. I'm spending so much time on the terminology, but yeah,
There's a lot of no. It's fine. It's fine. It's
yeah.
good to get some of this terminology on the table because it's out there. When people are trying to think through this, they're going to run into this terminology, and if you don't know what it means, you can't think through it. So
So I just think like, oh, is it a natural fact or a non-natural fact? What is a natural fact? Like I don't think I have a clear sense of what that is. Often, what people seem to mean is an empirically discoverable fact. Um, but and that's close. That's close to how my interlocutor in this book defines it. But I just feel like natural seems like it's a metaphysical category, and whether or not a term can be analyzed in more basic components, is that really a metaphysical category, or is that like a semantic thing? Or whether we can discover something through our senses, that seems more epistemic. And you can get around it by saying, well, we're just going to define the metaphysical terms so that it's the kind of thing that can be discovered through the senses. That just does that not just seem like an obviously ad hoc definition? I don't know. I don't like this at all. I think if you're going to ask me how I would define naturalism, it would be something like this. It would be like, okay, natural facts are facts about the space-time continuum according to, and now we have this problem too, like our best theory or our best physical theory. What if we know it's false because we don't have a final theory yet? According to our final theory, well, what we don't know what that is. But it's got to be something like facts that are grounded on the space-time continuum, or that science physics tells us about, according to our current theory or our best theory, but what we can surmise about what it will tell us. What I don't like about that is I don't see if Platonic universals are a part of reality and they transcend, they are not part of or reducible to anything on the space-time continuum, why are they not natural? Why would they not be? So I just can't see how this is a distinction that is very helpful. And I feel like this is one of those cases where a term has a glow about it. It's like natural. I'm a naturalist. It means I have science is real poster on my front yard or something. What does it mean, really?
yeah, it's like I said earlier. You can't, a single concept is not going to do but so much work. You've got to say, if somebody says I'm a naturalist, I say, okay, what do you mean by that? And what are the natural things that we're talking about here? If you're going to base your moral code or your meta ethics in something natural, we just need to talk about what that is. So I agree with you that the natural versus non-natural versions of realism, that distinction doesn't seem to me to be very helpful or get us very far. What I'm curious about with you, because I actually think you and I are probably going to agree a lot on certain aspects about realism, but I'm not certain of that. I'm just trying to get at what is your view of more of the foundation of morality. And I understand you think that realism is true, or at least some version of realism is true. What is that? How do we ground in reality these ideas of normativity and oughts and things like that?
Yeah. So I think what you've got to say is that there are moral truths or normative truths that are a basic part of the furniture of the universe. So a lot of people really hate this idea, and they see it as a liability, or at least a serious theoretical cost, a cost to parsimony or something like that. And want to try to explain everything without positing any kind of moral facts. So I guess my thought is, well, if you could, how much explanation is enough explanation? It seems to me that if you think that you can explain everything, except the moral features of the universe, or apparent moral features, I'll say, without begging the question, um, well, we can get everything we want except for ethical truths if we're some kind of naturalist that does not allow Platonic entities, doesn't allow moral facts. I mean, I suppose, but it just feels like here you've got one side begging the question against the other about what's really fundamental, what needs to be accounted for in reality. And I think the ethical is fundamental and even ultimately inescapable. And I think that the explanation of moral truths has to terminate in some basic moral truths. So there's some moral truths that are explained by more basic ones. Presumably, the moral fact that the transatlantic slave trade is morally wrong, that's not a basic moral fact. It's going to be explained by more fundamental truths. So it's going to be wrong because chattel slavery is wrong. So why is chattel slavery wrong? Well, now we're going to need to know about what moral theory is true, whether it's Kantianism or utilitarianism or what have you. And those moral facts are really hard to come by because moral theory is super contentious. But
isn't the ultimate question here simply what is the referent of wrong? What is the fact of reality that we're referring to when we say the word or use the concept wrong?
It's going to be some moral fact. It's going to be some moral fact.
And you in your view, is that moral fact out there in reality? Is it a quality that exists independent of human consciousness in reality, or is it something else? Because I think this is, to me, what makes realism seem difficult to get your head around. I think I regard realism typically as sort of a package deal where you've got two things going on in the same concept. You have sort of the Platonic idea of the good. The good exists out there, independent of our consciousness, independent of our desires and aims and all of that. And if that's the case, that's very clear. I can like, if that's what realism means, fine. But the other alternative is that realism doesn't mean that the good exists out there apart from consciousness, but rather that the good is an act of consciousness recognizing some external fact or some fact of reality. So it's got two elements. It's got consciousness plus fact, rather than just.
I don't understand
fact.
that second option. I don't understand that second, because I think that if you say it consists in my recognition of something, that sounds like it's a kind of relativism or constructivism, unless you say something else, which is like, oh no, there's some kind of Platonic fact that this kind of recognition constitutes good or something, and then we're back to the first version that you described. So I that's the way I go. That's the way I'm inclined to go. And there's certain puzzles with this view, but it's what I think is the right way to go here.
All right, so let me pick on that distinction a little bit then, because this is where I think I think there's a lot of clarity to be gained by adding a third alternative here to realism and anti-realism. I actually think that realism and anti-realism are a false alternative, or constitute a false alternative, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. So in my understanding of realism, if I try to give it an actual definition, it's the meta-ethical theory that goodness exists independent of human consciousness in nature. It's out there somewhere. It's a quality in nature. So Platonism fits perfectly into this. Kantianism fits into this because it's the moral law within. So it's independent of your mind. It's a fact, whether you've recognized it or not, and it's independent of human aims. So it's not like, well, I want to be happy, so I'm going to act this way. Kant would say, no, happiness is a separate matter. We're talking about moral law, which has nothing to do with your aims. So it's separate from human aims. That, I think, is a correct understanding of what the concept of realism can convey. Anti-realism is simply a response to this. It says, no, there is no fact of reality that constitutes the good, independent of human consciousness. Human consciousness is what makes something good. And this is why you get this alternative of either good is out there or good is just in here. It's just made up by human beings. I say it's good, so it's good. Or my culture says it's good, so it's good. It's good because we deemed it so, right? So it's kind of, you get this alternative of some kind of subjectivism, whether personal or social or whatever, or you get some kind of, quote, realism where the fact of goodness is out there. But what this alternative leaves out of the equation entirely, in my view, is the idea that goodness is the recognition, the use of the in here, the use of the mind to recognize certain facts of reality, the combination of which, our aims and our thinking, plus facts of reality that give rise to the whole business of concepts like good and should and morality and ought and all of that. Realism can't be two things. It can't be the good is out there plus the good is a recognition of what's out there, because recognition is mind dependent. And anti-realism can't be, well, we use our minds to figure out what the facts are to decide what's good, because that would mean there's a fact out there. What I think we need is a third alternative, and I think objectivity is the correct term here, which is the good means that there's a fact of reality that we need to adhere to, and then there's human purposes and thinking that combine with that fact. And this gives rise to a third alternative, which is neither just out there nor just in here, but an interaction of fact and consciousness. And in my view, this is I know you're to some extent familiar with Ayn Rand. And this is essentially her ethics. She says, look, the standard of moral value is determined by the facts of reality that give rise to our need of concepts such as morality and value. Why do we need these things? Is there some fact of reality that gives rise to our need to form concepts such as value and good and ought? If so, then that interrelationship of the mind and human purposes plus the facts of reality constitutes an objective standard. And in her view, and I'll drop this and then leave to hear your thoughts on this. Her idea is essentially that the facts of reality that give rise to the need of the concept of value are the fact that we're alive. And in order to remain alive, we have to act in certain ways and not in other ways. We need terms for the things we need to go after, whether it's food, clothing, shelter, or freedom. And we also need terms for the actions we'll take to get those things. And this is where she comes up with the concepts of value and virtue. The values are simply the things that we go after to gain them so that we can live. And virtues are the actions we take to go after those things. And to my mind, this just grounds morality and reality, and basically it basically eliminates the problem of realism, it's all just out there, or subjectivism, anti-realism, it's all just in here. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that idea of a third alternative and having it be either called objectivity or something separate from realism and anti-realism.
Yeah, I'm going to reject that there's a third way here. There are views that straddle the boundaries, though. So, like Kantian constructivism is a view, it's a version of subjectivism or constructivism or what have you, but it is based on universal rational desires. So that's the idea. So it's not like it's supposed to free you from this sort of willy-nilly, we could just change what we want one day, because the desires that give rise to morality are too essential to our nature. So whether or not that I think it falls just on the other side of the anti-realism, but it's very close to realism. What you're describing, I mean, I guess I have a few reactions to it. One is, I want to ask, is it a fact that our mind interacting with this is good or not? If it is, that sounds like an objective fact. And notice that Chris Heathwood makes this point really nicely in an article called "Can Morality Have a Source?" That the basic moral facts, whatever they are, have to have a conditional structure. So, like, what would the moral fact be if there are no humans or no conscious creatures in the world? I don't think anything morally interesting is going on in a world where there are no conscious beings at all. If such a world there is. So nothing morally mattered before the first conscious life forms emerged, in the universe.
Yeah.
But it would still be the case that if you have a being like you or I, you couldn't just kill that person, for kicks or something. And so I would think that conditional that you have to treat beings of a certain kind a certain way. That conditional would be true even in a universe that doesn't have beings of which that could be true.
That strikes me as odd. I don't know how. So the way that I like to hold this is that the concept of good presupposes an answer to the question, good to whom and for what, right? And this is from Rand also, this idea. Or the concept of value presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what. If there's no being to whom something is good, what would be the referent of good? Why would it? There's no there. It seems to me there might be planets orbiting each other.
There's more sense of good simplicator, which I think I can make sense of. A lot of people have tried to analyze this away. So, like Geach, for example, and then Judith Jarvis Thompson in her book on normativity. She ultimately thinks good means good for some purpose, but it seems to me that's a distinct notion of good. Things that are good simplicator will tend to be good for some purpose, but I don't think that exhausts my conception of good. That's what I would say. The other thing is, I want to know. I guess I would want to interrogate this view about. We would want it to be sufficiently general that it could describe good for beings very, 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 very much unlike us, right? I think science fiction is actually very helpful here for expanding our moral imaginations in this way. So insect creatures, like on Ender's Game or something like that, their psychology, their needs are very different from ours, and yet we can still we would say, okay, so we can still talk about something being, that they're having a certain kind of moral worth, certain things being good for them, bad for them. So we would want whatever view this is to be sufficiently general that it's not too anthropocentric. I would think.
Yeah, I think it is sufficiently general, though. So let me flesh this out a little bit. I don't think we even need to go to science fiction. You can look at just living things in general.
Yeah.
Life is, in my estimate, what makes values both possible and necessary. If there's no life, then values aren't possible because there's no thing to pursue values or to care about values or to act toward values. There's just there's nothing to do. And life also makes values necessary because if a thing does exist and it's living, in order to remain alive, it must pursue values or it will go out of existence. And this is true of plants, flowers, trees, and the like. It's true of non-rational animals, tigers, antelope, etc. And it's true of us. So it is very general. It applies to all living things. Now, morality doesn't apply to all living things, but values do. Flowers value nutrients and sunlight and water, and they value it in a different way. It's not purposive valuing. It's not conscious. Oh, I want, this is something I want to go after. So they're different, and they're different. They're substantially different from animals who, you can debate whether animals like tigers and crows have some degree of choice in what they do. I think they don't. I think they basically act on instincts, but their instincts are such that they go after the things that are necessary to sustain their lives. And so here again, we have the consciousness of the animal, which in this case is, I think, driven by instinct, going after things in order to live. You get to human beings, and we have not only consciousness, but in my estimate, volitional consciousness. So we get to activate our minds by choice or default to just going by our emotions. And this is what gives rise to the need of the concept of morality or ought, because Kant was right that ought implies can. So if we're going to talk about oughts, then there's got to be an alternative here as to whether we're going to act one way or another. But I think, and I agree with Rand on this, all of this is grounded in the fact that the only or the fundamental phenomenon that gives rise to the possibility and need of values is life, the existence of life. So, for human beings, our life is the thing that makes values possible and necessary. And the reason we need to go after values is in order to live. This is where I believe we get the correct, and I think it's objectively true, conclusion that human life, is the standard of moral value. And it just means, the factual requirements of existing as the kind of beings we are is what gives rise to this whole field of morality. And I see this not necessarily as a form of realism. I think some people say, well, that's a form of realism because you're saying there's a fact of reality. But the fact of reality that I'm talking about is not out there independent of human purposes. It's conjoined with human purposes. It's because we choose to live or we want to live that we need to act in certain ways. So it's conditional. You were talking a minute ago about conditionality. And I think that's crucial, and it's distinct from categorical imperatives, the whole Kantian, sort of deontological approach to ethics, which is you must do this, and there's no reason, it's just you must. I think objectivity doesn't entail or involve in any way that kind of categorical imperative. I think it's a conditional or a hypothetical imperative. If you want to live as the kind of being you are, then you must act in certain ways and not in others. And to tie this into your point about slavery, slavery being wrong, as Abraham Lincoln put it, if anything is wrong, slavery is wrong, or if slavery is not wrong, I don't know what is wrong. I would agree with that, but you still have to define wrong. You still have to have a standard by reference to which something is wrong. In my estimate, the reason slavery is wrong is because it treats a human being as if he's not a human being. It treats a human being as if he's some kind of a subvolitional animal, an animal who does not have the faculty of reason and choice, and therefore his own right to live his life according to his judgment. So that's a lot. I'll stop for a minute but I wanted to get your thoughts on these ideas, because I have long held that realism versus anti-realism does not do the work we need in these distinctions, and that we need a third alternative. You may or may not know this, but Rand used different language for this. She talked about subjectivism, intrinsicism. Intrinsicism is the idea that good is intrinsic in reality somewhere. It's out there apart from us. So that would include Platonism and things along those lines. And then objectivity, which is in the third alternative that I'm talking about here. But the concept of intrinsicism for her basically meant what I think many people today mean by realism. that the good is out there, distinct from and independent of human thinking and human purposes.
There's quite a lot to say here. One point is just about the good simplicator or just plain good versus good for something distinction to highlight. I'm not saying this from a religious point of view, but just as a conceptual illustration. So God creates a universe with living things, and he says that it's good. That just seems to be the statement that it's good that these things exist at all, that there be beings that have goals and this kind of thing, have a will to live and survive and reproduce. It's good that that exists. Now, it might also be good for God's plans, but you can imagine a variation of this where you just have a God that just creates a universe he thinks is good and has no further interaction with it. And I can make sense of such a God pronouncing the universe to be good. So I feel like I have this concept of good that is not good for, but you can evaluate the state of affairs, that there are beings for which things are good. I feel like I have a pretty clear conception of that distinction. And I don't think you can reduce one to the other very well.
So to my mind, that's not clear, just for the record. Like I don't, good unmoored from a purpose, or good unmoored from an agent and an aim, strikes me as just a floating abstraction, just as something that is a sound being made. But if I can't identify the referent of it, it just does. I can't get my head around it. I don't want to interrupt you too much here, but I just want to. You seem to be able to make sense of that, but I can't make any sense of it.
Well, it's hard to know what to do when you get to disagreements in meta-ethics, where I feel like I have a firm grasp on a concept and someone else says, well, I don't have a grasp on that concept.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what to do other than to bracket that and proceed, and then see if something in the dialectic sheds some light on that.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
Yeah. But I've also thought, as a tangent, that there's not, as far as I know, there's not a whole literature on what to do about. There's a lot of literature about disagreements about intuitions, but what do we do when philosophers claim not to have like concepts that other philosophers think are absolutely central? What do we do with that kind of disagreement? Yeah. As far as I know, that is a completely unexplored area of like social epistemology. I mean, maybe someone has got some paper on this, but I haven't read it. So
yeah, particularly with intuitions, which I don't understand what people mean when they talk about those either. Unless
you don't know what people mean by an intuition.
I don't know what they mean by it unless they mean something to the effect of, I have a feeling about something that is based on the knowledge and values that I have, and I haven't really I haven't gotten my head around what exactly is giving rise to that feeling, but I don't regard it as innate knowledge of some sort. It's knowledge based on my experiences, but I just have not made it explicit. So it's kind of an implicit form of knowledge.
When you say that it is wrong to treat a being with agency as if they were not a being with agency, as happens in slavery, what are you basing that judgment on, if not an intuition?
Yeah, so I base that on this. I regard the factual requirements of human life as the standard of moral value. So human beings are a certain kind of being based on our nature. We have a means of living. In particular, we have a rational faculty, which is our means of understanding what things are, how we can use them to support our lives, how we can build things to support our lives, and so on. So this faculty that we have is our basic means of living, just like an eagle's basic means of living are its wings and its talons. In our case, it's our reasoning mind. And so because this is a fact about human beings, and because in order for a human being to live fully as a human being, he has to be free to act on his judgment. So if I put Frederick Douglass in a cage, he can't act on his judgment. He's caged like an animal. So I'm treating a human being as if he's not a human being. And so I'm violating a fact about human nature by means of this action. And it's a fact about human nature that's based on the requirements of human life. So if human life is the standard of value, and I can give an argument for why I hold that to be the case, then for me to treat a human being against the requirements of his life violates that standard.
Okay, so I guess my most pressing, I mean, one, this sounds very much like Parmenides, man is the measure. Why is man the measure? Why are we special? Especially if there are other conscious beings in the universe. Why is our life form the standard of ethics? Now,
yeah, in this sense, I would agree with Parmenides that man is the measure, but he's not the measure in the sense that anything he says goes. So it's not a subjective measure. It's a measure that involves two things: consciousness and the facts of reality, external to consciousness. So one fact of reality, the fundamental fact of reality here that I'm talking about, that is apart from that is a fact regardless of whether or not you or I acknowledge it, is that human nature exists. Human beings have certain requirements. They have certain capacities and certain requirements. Capacities such as reason, the capacity to use language, and like those are capacities. The requirements are we have to act in certain ways and not in others, or we can't sustain our lives.
Yeah, but why should we sustain our lives? This is an ethical question. This is an ethical question.
So,
and so you've got, and they're actually, I think we should, but that is because I think that our lives are good. But there are people you find who reject it. I mean, the late Paul Ehrlich didn't think we should go on sustaining our lives.
Oh, yeah.
They're pro.
Certainly not.
There are pro human extinction people.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who want to use technology to modify our standard of life beyond recognition. And so they are able, or they at least make a claim that is comprehensible to me, even though I reject it. I can make sense of what they're saying. They're saying that these life forms are bad, not bad for relative to our life form. That wouldn't make any sense. But they have this concept that I think I also have of good that, you know, better than, you know, in some objective sense. And they're saying, yeah, well, maybe our life form is not worth maintaining. And that is an ethical claim. And so it appears that we can do ethical reasoning that is beyond our biological necessities, because we can reject those necessities.
Yeah. So your basic question there was, you know, why should we live, or why choose to live? Why not? You know, why do that? And here's the thing: I don't think that the concept of should, which is a moral concept, pertains unless the agent in question chooses to live. So if I don't want to live, then I don't need ethics. I don't need anything. I don't need values. I don't need virtues. I don't need knowledge. I don't even need air. So if I don't choose to live, then ethics is off the table. All of this stuff is off the table because I don't need it. If I do choose to live, then this is the beginning. The choice to live is the beginning of ethics. It's what gives rise to the need of values and oughts and the whole integrated network of moral knowledge that we need in order to live fully as human beings. So if you ask, let me just put a cap on that, and then I'll. So if you say, you know, why choose to live, I would say I could go in two directions. If you're talking to an adult who has a bunch of values in life, the reason to live is the values that you have. My children, my relationships, my work that I love. There's lots of reasons to live. If you say, well, apart from all of that, let's say you didn't have anything, you're just like a blank slate, maybe behind a veil of a new kind of a veil of ignorance or something, quote John Rawls. Why choose to live if there's no reason to live? I would say, well, there is no reason to choose to live if there's no reason to live. But no one is in that circumstance. If you have values that you like and want to pursue, then remaining alive is a value to you because of those things. And life is the fundamental because it makes all of those things possible and necessary. And if you don't want to live, then you don't need any of that stuff. So I think it's a black and white alternative there.
No, this doesn't work. I mean, look at Cato's suicide. He chose that based on his ethical values. It was a decision not to live, not to remain alive, to, I don't know, give a middle finger to tyranny, to stand up for the republic as he valued it more than his own life. It was not, it's not as though that kind of ethics is reducible to maintaining life function or something. And there are more moderate cases like this. Like,
I'm not saying people do this as a matter of fact. I'm saying that people should treat. I'm not saying that they do. I'm saying that people should treat
so Cato
the
was
requirements of their life
wrong.
as the standard. Pardon?
He was wrong. So Cato was wrong. He should not have killed himself.
It depends on whether you are doing it for self-sacrificial reasons or to uphold your highest life-serving values. So let's take it's I think easier to work with something like take John take the statement, give me liberty or give me death. So why would someone say that? Why would we hold that it's better to have death than to live enslaved? Okay. My view is that a human life is a life guided by the judgment of one's own mind. And so if I can't live a human life, then I'm not actually living. I'm living. So if I'm in a concentration camp and I'm being, abused and there's no hope of me escaping from this situation, then I might choose to die. I might choose suicide over life. Why? Because it's not the life that a human being should live. So I'm using human life here as the concept to denote a full human life based on the nature of a human being. That's why, again, going back to Frederick Douglass, if I put Frederick Douglass in a cage, or I treat him like a subhuman being, I'm violating a fact about him, and that's wrong. If I want to live fully as a human being, and if some government or some slave owner or something stops me from doing that, I might very justifiably say I don't want to live this way and take my own life or prefer death to that non-life version of life.
Okay, so I think there's a serious equivocation going on here, whereby you're taking an ethics that purports to be based on human life function and stretching it to such an extent that it basically covers any kind of values you might have, right? And then why is this a middle path? I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it at all.
Well, it doesn't cover any kind of value. So if the factual requirements of human life are the standard of value, then right and wrong are prescribed by that fact. So, for instance, one of the things we have to do to live a full life as a human being is we have to use our mind and be productive. So two things, but putting them together, we have to be productive. You have to produce the values on which your life depends. If I don't produce any values, I can't consume them, in which case I'll die. Now, if I don't produce values and other people keep me alive through, altruistic means or whatever, and they're giving me stuff and I'm not producing, then I'm still reliant on production. I'm just being parasitic. So the fact remains that in order to live as a human being, you have to produce, or somebody has to produce for you. So this is a fact of reality. And I say that because it's a factual requirement of human life, that makes it a genuine value, an actual moral value to pursue that thing. How is that not let me give an alternative here. So that's something that's good for your life. Now, let's take something that is not, that somebody might think is good, robbing banks. So I go, okay, look, if you say that life is the standard of value, I'm going to rob banks for a living, and that's going to fill my pocket with money, and then I can do the things that I want to do. But what's going on here? If we step back and look at the full picture, if we look at the full context of the situation, the bank robber is ignoring all sorts of facts about the kind of being he is. He's ignoring the fact that by stealing from people. He's violating a natural fact about human beings, which is that we have to produce in order to live. And he's trying to live as a parasite, acknowledging somebody's got to produce, but it's not going to be me. He's also ignoring the fact that in order to have a spiritual life that is good for a human being, you have to feel good about yourself. You have to have self-esteem. This may be a more abstract type of fact, but it's still a fact. Otherwise, the field of psychology wouldn't exist. People need to feel good about themselves. They need to know that they're capable of dealing with the world and worthy of success in the world, or they feel rotten, which is, and you can see this in all the mobster movies, you know, the Untouchables and the like, where these guys are constantly paranoid and they don't feel good about themselves. They have low self-esteem and they either get killed by the mafia or wind up in jail, or they just are on the run the whole time. So yeah, somebody can say, I will rob banks and that will be good for me, but it's just genuinely not a good life for a human being to do that. Good life consists of being productive, trading with others, having great relationships with good people, and so on. And on some level, we all know this.
Right. I think we know this because we're acquainted with certain ethical facts. We don't know this because biologists have told us so, or something like that. And I think I feel like you're trying to pound this square peg into a round hole. The square peg being, you know, the facts that are part of common sense morality or some kind of.
Oh, I'm not saying it's common sense.
Well, I just think what you're appealing to, you claim to be appealing to descriptive facts about human biological necessity, but when you unpack that in these various cases, you're giving me a bunch of like normative facts or normative conclusions, ethical conclusions that are not given in the facts that you want to make foundational. I think you really are pointing towards a realism and not this other third option.
Well, I think I'm pointing toward a realism if you take realism to mean there are facts by reference to which we need to think and draw conclusions in order to live fully as human beings. There's no question about that. I think you can actually speak about morality without using normative terminology at all, because it's all fact-based. So for instance, Ayn Rand's essay, Causality versus Duty, is sort of a good example of this. All rational moral hypotheticals, in my view, are, or rational moral principles, in my view, are hypothetical, not categorical. So they're conditional, not categorical. And the way that we can make rational sense of morality is, if you want to live as a human being and achieve happiness as this kind of being you are, that's the if, then you must act in certain ways and not in others. This is just a fact about the causal nature of the world and human nature. Now, there's no ought in any of what I just said. If you want to live this kind of life, then you must act in this way. I'm not bringing in normative terminology there. I'm leaving it out. It's an if-then based on a fact. I think when we use normative terminology like ought and should, all we're doing is we're using those properly as shortcuts for, if you want this, then you must do this. And that's what should and ought mean. You should get a career that you love. Why? Because in order to live fully as a human being, you're going to be spending a lot of time working. You may as well get something that you really, really enjoy, because that's what it means to live a full human life. Does
everyone want to live a full human life? Everyone?
I don't think so. And I think that that's a shame, but I think that's largely because people have been confused by parents, preachers, and teachers about what morality is and what life is supposed to be all about.
No, I'm talking about psychopaths. People like.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I mean, like.
Well, certainly psychopaths are a whole nother ballgame. Yeah, they first of all, a psychopath might, quote, want to live. I don't know if that's that category, but there are people who don't want to live and they take their lives. I mean, I've known people.
Eric Harris, who was the ringleader of the Columbine shooting. I read Dave Cullen's book, Columbine. fantastic piece of investigative journalism. You know, there was all these reports in the media that were false, that he was bullied and this was some kind of revenge. He was the bully. He was thoroughly misanthropic. He hated humanity. He wanted to kill as many people as possible and die. Okay, I think that's wrong. And if that's wrong, it's not wrong based on some desire he has. It's wrong in the categorical sense.
So it's wrong I'd say it's wrong in this sense. It's wrong in the objective sense, because right and wrong, properly understood, logically understood, arise only because human life exists and we need to sustain it. If someone wants to destroy it, he has placed himself outside of morality, but it doesn't mean that you and I are outside of morality. It means he's turned himself into a monster of some sort. And if he's going to unleash force against us, the very reason we're warranted in dropping him, if he starts opening fire, somebody can just shoot him in the head and it's perfectly legitimate. Why? Because morality is something that human beings need to understand and act on in order to live as human beings. And he has launched an assault on all of this.
Well, sure. But so with any kind of hypothetical imperative, what makes it a hypothetical imperative is I could just walk away from the antecedent of the conditional. I could say, you know, if I want to live as a full human being, what if I decide, well, maybe I don't, maybe I want to be like Eric Harris, then it would no longer apply to me. But I insist that it does. I mean, I'm with Kant on this. I'm with Kant, not on everything, but on this. I think you can't walk away from the fundamental moral facts. They apply to you whether you want to or not, as opposed to something like this. You know, if I want to go to the movie theaters, then I have to buy the movies. I have to buy a ticket. If I decide I don't want to buy a ticket, well, then I don't need to. Excuse me. If I decide I don't need to go to see the movies, then I have no reason to buy a ticket.
Yeah.
Any system of morality as hypothetical imperatives necessarily is going to have this implication that in principle, maybe it's very, very psychologically rare. Maybe in reality, I wouldn't actually want to do this, but in principle, I could walk away from its most fundamental imperatives. And I just reject that. I just reject that.
Yeah. See, I think I disagree with you on this, and it is a sort of a technical issue, but here's the way I would think about it. Life or death is the fundamental alternative that we face. Every other alternative is simply an instance or is dependent on that alternative. So even an Eric Harris to wake up in the morning and be like, I want to go kill kids at my school today, he is depending on the existence of his life to do any of the actions he's going to take that day. So in acting against life while depending on the existence of life, he is acting in a contradictory manner. Now, can he do that in the can sense? Yes, he can. May he do that in the moral sense? Absolutely not. He's using his capacities to act against the very thing that makes those capacities possible, human life. Human life, in my view, and here's where I agree with Rand on this, it's the fundamental alternative that gives rise to both the possibility and the need of values and morality. Someone can be alive and act against the requirements of human life, but in doing so, he's acting wrong. If he doesn't want to live, he doesn't have to live. He can sit down and stop acting and he'll soon die. If he does choose to remain alive and then acts against the requirements of human life, I think he's engaged in a contradiction and he's immoral for doing so. If his immorality goes to the extent of using physical force against other people to stop them from living, then he goes to a higher level of wrong and genuine evil. So I don't think there's any contradiction here at all. Morality can be conditional on the choice to live. And if you choose to live, but then choose to violate the factual requirements of your life, you're acting in a contradictory manner. So I don't see a problem there.
But that is not causal reasoning. That kind of appealing to some kind of consistent standard in a quasi-Kantian way, that's not causal reasoning. You're appealing to a normative standard.
Well, how is this not causal? If you want to live as a human being, you must act in accordance with your nature. That seems quite causal to me.
That's either trivial or not true, because was Eric Harris acting in accordance with his nature?
No, and he wasn't living as a human being. He was living as a sub-animal. He had chosen to throw aside everything about human life, the requirements of human life, the nature of human beings, the fact that we're individuals, the fact that your life belongs to you and mine belongs to me. All of this and more he throws out and says, no, I'm going to go shoot people up today.
Well, then it boils down to, why should I live as a human being? And that cannot be captured from within this system of hypotheticals that's all based on the necessities of human life. Why should I live as a human being? That's a real question we can ask. And some people reject it.
I get that. But here's the thing. The concept of should there only has any meaning if you choose to live. If you say, look, I don't want to live, so why should I do anything? There's no answer to that. You already decided not to live. Shoulds don't apply. Nothing applies.
No. I mean,
you decided not to live.
There are people who face this. I mean, I hope this still doesn't exist. It used to exist. You know, there's a cult of personality surrounding school shooters, particularly the Columbine shooters, particularly Eric Harris. And there have been various teenagers who've been enthralled by this, and some of whom have even acted on their enthrallment and done copycat murders. One of them happened in my high school. And so imagine somebody who's thinking, who's getting sucked into this very dark, evil subculture. Should I act as Eric Harris, or should I, go pursue my career as a doctor, whatever the alternative would be? Now, to say, well, no ethical question arises here, because if you choose to act like Eric Harris, you're stepping outside of human life. Well, in some sense, yes, but obviously this is an ethical question, and one that has a very clear answer. You ought not behave like that.
Oh, no, I agree that he ought not behave like that, but that ought remains regardless of what he thinks or says or does.
It's not hypothetical then.
It's hypothetical in this sense. If he wants to live as a human being, then he needs moral principles such as ought and should and the like. If he doesn't want to live as a human being, he doesn't need those things. If he wants to remain alive and act against human life, he can try to do that, but moral people who want to live and are engaging in oughts and shoulds that are based on that fact, have a moral right to drop him or to put him in jail or whatever they need to do with him to stop him from acting against human life. He doesn't have to buy into this in order for the facts of morality to remain. But if he doesn't want to live, he doesn't need the facts of morality. He just doesn't need any of them because he's chosen not to live. And again, if he chooses to remain alive and then act against the requirements of human life, that's a contradiction, and he can go for it if he wants. But as soon as he starts harming someone who knows that he or his loved ones or whoever else has a moral right to act to protect themselves, they're going to do that, and they're going to drop him like the, sub-animal he has chosen to be. There's no contradiction here. Life is the thing that gives rise to the need and possibility of values. And if someone wants to try to remain alive yet act against those requirements, he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, which, he's welcome to try, but he's not going to live a great life doing it. And if he uses force against other people, they're justified in killing him or whatever retaliatory force is appropriate for what he tries to do.
I think we may be at an impasse at this point.
Maybe so. So let me do this then. We've been going for almost an hour and a half now. So I'll give you the last few words here, and so you tell me what you think. If anything today has struck you as particularly either interesting or troublesome, you can let us know, and then let us know where people can keep abreast of your work.
Oh boy, let's see. So I have a site that I'm supposed to be updating that I need to be more diligent about. Just spencercasephilosophy.com. My most recent public essay, which just came out 2 days ago, is called Jihadism, at least as bad as Nazism, at the Philosopher's Magazine. My book, Why It's Okay to Be Patriotic, will be out later this year. I guess it seems to me that there's been an interesting conversation, but one, we've got a conceptual disagreement about the concept of good. Is there a distinct kind of good simplicator or good as such that is distinct from like purely instrumental notions of good? I maintain that there is. Or purely functional notions of good? I maintain that there is. And I also think that if we want to try to define ethics based on human nature, we're going to have a normatively very robust notion of human nature that goes beyond the purely hypothetical or conditional.
Got it. I think there is that. I think there is a very robust conception of human nature. It would be another conversation to get into all of that. But I think we're beings of body and mind, matter and spirit, and that constellation of elements in human life is massive and deep and important. So I think there is that there. But I also recognize that that's a whole nother discussion. So maybe another time. Anyway, best success with your forthcoming book on patriotism. I look forward to that. And I'm going to check out your writings and your podcast. By the way, I don't think you mentioned your podcast. What is that?
Oh, yes. It's called Micro-Digressions, a philosophy podcast with a hyphen between micro and digressions. And yes, I'm going to be recording a new episode Friday. So, yeah, all sorts of interesting topics come up there. Political topics, moral topics, epistemic topics.
Cool. Thank you. I'll check that out as well. All right, Spencer, thanks so much for your time today. I appreciated the conversation.
Thank you so much.